Hi folks, I wanted to share this book with you and just give you a bit of a review and really a recommendation. It's called The Big Fat Surprise. It's written by Nina Teicholz. I don't know how to pronounce her name. It's The Big Fat Surprise, Why Butter, Meat, and Cheese Belong in a Healthy Diet. It was extremely engaging. I found I could hardly put it down once I picked it up. It's nonfiction. Essentially, Nina Teicholz is a journalist who began to look into the history of the hypothesis that saturated fats or animal foods cause heart disease. And she read, I think, hundreds, if not thousands, of studies in coming to write this book. She does an excellent job of reviewing all of the major studies that contributed or supported that hypothesis about saturated fat. And she also does a really good job of detailing the political history of that theory becoming sort of a national recommendation in the United States. So she does a great job criticizing those studies that she reviews, and she drills right down into them, describes how they're conducted with a real sense of the problems of them. It gives a real sense of why scientifically they shouldn't be it shouldn't be that persuasive or that compelling at this point. So really strong, really strongly written. The book was structured super well. You could definitely understand her thesis as it moved from one chapter to the next. It was all put together very well. Despite being very complex and deeply detailed. There's one particular chapter that I really enjoyed, which was how the diet heart hypothesis goes to Washington. And there's a bit of a libertarian message in there if you're looking for it. Essentially, she covers how this hypothesis, which she says really never had valid scientific support, eventually became the United States dietary recommendations. And of course, this was a political process, and this came up in the 70s, and really the board that set up these recommendations, it was a political board, of course. It was a senatorial committee staffed by senatorial staffers, if I could say that. So not scientists, and there was tremendous tension with the scientific body, funded and founded by the U.S. government specifically for the purpose of giving the U.S. government advice on scientific matters. But this committee that was set up to consider food recommendations or food guidelines ended up ignoring that scientific body's recommendations, more than ignoring them, but specifically going against them, as that body was suggesting that they'd be very cautious in making recommendations for the entire U.S. population based on what was really inconclusive evidence about saturated fat and cholesterol being related to heart disease. But the scientists lost and the politicians won, and because of the power we grant our government and our state and politicians, most people don't know that. They don't think of the government as being made up of flawed individuals. They think of it that it has this awesome assumed power and authority. So people don't really a lot of people don't critically question what the government tells them to do. That's the position and authority we've given them. Now, in this case, this committee, in the United States, took this power given to them, and effectively they abused it, and it turns out probably caused a lot of harm. Not only did they do no good, but by recommending that people avoid animal foods and saturated fats, over time, people replaced that with vegetable oils, carbohydrates, and trans fats from vegetable oils as well, and more sugar. All of which the data is now showing are almost certainly a lot more dangerous and a lot more harmful than animal foods. So it's a little libertarian story in there of the government assuming this need to act when really they didn't have the persuasive authority to just tell people what the science was, using their political authority to set these recommendations, and ultimately possibly costing tens of thousands of people their lives. Maybe. I mean, I don't want to be hyperbolic, but how if carbohydrates and vegetable oils are a significant cause of heart disease and cancer, and the U.S. government and other governments have been recommended that we eat that way from the 1970s up until the early 2000s, they bear some responsibility. So I enjoyed that, being somebody who is a bit cynical of government. If I were to make one criticism of the book, it's that in the last quarter or fifth of the book, roughly, she starts talking about the low-carb diet or the low-carb hypothesis, the alternative obesity hypothesis, and it's something, whatever you want to call that. This is all tied into, the keto diets or paleo diets, carnivore diets. Is all the same science underlying, all of these diets. Even Atkins, before all of that. While I'm personally persuaded by the science coming out in support of those diets and the ideas behind it, I felt that her treatment of that science was less rigorous and less thorough than her criticisms of the fat hypothesis. So she points to the important figures articulating and developing the low-carb hypothesis, but just didn't do quite as good of a job dialing into those studies and letting the reader know exactly how they were conducted and how, because of how they were conducted, what their exact results were and how they can be more reliable than the many fat studies that she so ably criticized. But despite that, as I said, the book was very readable. I found extremely informative. It covers a lot of the dangers of vegetable oils, and really, in my view, tears apart the criticisms of animal fats in terms of the relationship, at least to heart disease. So, if you're somebody who was concerned about your diet and who is reflective on that, trying to dial that in. This is a great summary of a lot of the science. Maybe it's a contrarian view if you're somebody who eats a low-fat diet, or if you're getting into a low-carb diet. This will give you a bit more ammunition to feel good eating your bacon or grass-fed butter or steaks or whatever that is, knowing that a lot of the studies that were supposed to tell us that these animal foods were bad for us, really didn't show that at all, or in any event weren't particularly well conducted. So that's all. The Big Fat Surprise. Highly recommend it. Go check it out. It's from 2014, a few years old, but it's it was right current up to 2014. So it's got all the latest science and studies in it. Go check it out. It's a good book.